Imagine waking up and your two young children are gone. No screams, no struggle, no doors left open, just silence. The mother Malaya calls 911. She doesn't cry, she doesn't scream their names, she doesn't run into the woods. She says she heard them playing, then nothing. No signs of forced entry, no Amber Alert, no panic. Instead, she stays calm. She deletes photos, she moves out, she cuts off contact. Why no urgency? Why does everything feel scripted? This is the disappearance of Lilly and Jack Sullivan, and the mother's silence is louder than anything else. What did Malaya do? In missing persons cases, a parent's actions in the first hours are often the clearest window into truth or deception. For Malaya Brooks Murray, the mother of 6-year-old Lilly and 4-year-old Jack Sullivan, what she did and crucially what she didn't do has become the center of growing suspicion, both in the public and among investigators. Her silence has spoken volumes. Her choices in the days and weeks that followed have raised more questions than answers. Malaya Brooks Murray lived in a trailer home on Gerlach Road in rural Pictou County, Nova Scotia. She is the biological mother of all 3 children, Lilly, Jack, and the youngest Meadow. Her partner at the time was Daniel Martel, who had taken on the role of stepfather. Though their home was tucked deep in isolation, it would soon become the center of one of the most puzzling child disappearance cases in recent Canadian memory. What began as a quiet morning on May 2nd quickly spiraled into national concern. But the woman at the center of it all remained oddly calm. Malaya comes from the Brooks family, an indigenous Mi'kmaq lineage with deep historical roots in Nova Scotia. The Brooks clan has long been described as protective, private, and historically resistant to authority. Some family members were known for activism, others had documented confrontations with the legal system. That context alone does not indicate guilt, but it paints a backdrop for the kind of mistrust and isolation that may have influenced Malaya's decisions. Reports suggest she had faced financial stress, possible emotional instability, and was already under the radar of Child Protection Services (CPS) before the incident. On May 1st, one day before the children vanished, Malaya made a seemingly casual call to Daniel's family. She told them that Lilly wasn't feeling well and therefore would not be visiting them that weekend. No alarms were raised at the time, but this small decision, keeping the kids home, would later be scrutinized. Why the change of plans? Why the mention of illness? Was it an innocent update or a preemptive narrative? By the morning of May 2nd, Malaya placed a call to 911. At approximately 10 r.m. in that call, she stated that her children were gone. Her explanation was that she had woken up and found the home too quiet. She assumed they had opened the sliding back door and wandered into the woods. But she did not specify when she last saw them, or exactly what time they might have disappeared. This vagueness added to the confusion. The theory was repeated to police and media, yet the physical evidence didn't back it up. The door showed no signs of use. No neighbors heard cries. No one recalled seeing or hearing the children leave. There were no footprints, just silence. And from the mother, no tears, no screaming. Just explanations. In the hours following the disappearance, Malaya posted on social media, called for help. From her post, she described her children as friendly, writing, "They are not scared of strangers. They are friendly. They could follow anyone." She used these ways to ask the public for demanding an Amber Alert. But the statement raised eyebrows, especially among Daniel's family, who later asserted that both Lilly and Jack were non-verbal, particularly Jack. To them, it was deeply suspicious that she portrayed the children as talkative and outgoing when they had significant speech limitations. In the days that followed, her behavior took an even stranger turn. While communities rallied and volunteers searched the dense woods around Pictou County, Malaya kept her distance. She did not participate in the public vigils. She did not speak at community prayer circles. She granted only minimal interviews, and in those appearances, many noted her lack of visible emotion. Some described her demeanor as flat. Others called it detached. For a mother whose 2 children had supposedly vanished without a trace, her restraint was disquieting. Meanwhile, a new concern emerged. Just days after the disappearance, RCMP began investigating a forest fire that had broken out roughly 36 to 45 minutes away from the Gerlach trailer. The fire's timing triggered speculation. Was it possible evidence had been destroyed? In the end, RCMP declared no connection to the missing children. Still, the fire added to the air of unease. Then came the fracture. On May 3rd, only a day after the search began, Malaya had a heated confrontation with Daniel's family. The details of the argument remain vague, but those close to the situation claim it stemmed from Daniel's relatives beginning to question the story. Words were exchanged, and relationships broke. In the wake of that confrontation, Malaya began to retreat further from public view and from cooperation with law enforcement. By this point, Daniel himself was shut out. He later revealed that Malaya had blocked him on social media and changed her relationship status to single. Even more troubling, CPS denied Daniel any contact with Meadow, his stepdaughter and the only child still in Malaya's care. Though he had been actively involved in raising Lilly and Jack, he was now excluded entirely by both the system and the mother. On May 17, she made a decision that stunned even the most seasoned observers. She packed up her belongings, took her youngest daughter Meadow, and moved out of the Gerlach trailer. She left the area entirely. She cut off contact with Daniel's family. And from that moment on, she went silent. No public statements. No media outreach. Not even a post or a shared missing child flyer. As far as the public could tell, the mother of 2 missing children had disappeared herself, emotionally, and in some ways, literally. This silence was made worse by new revelations about the days prior. According to school records and the bus driver, the last confirmed day Lilly and Jack attended school was April 29. April 30 was a non-school day. On May 1 and 2, Malaya reportedly kept the children home, telling others that Lilly was sick. That decision, seemingly minor, has taken on ominous weight. She had kept them out of public sight for 4 days before placing the 911 call. In the weeks that followed, CPS took official action. Due to concerns over neglect and Malaya's behavior, Meadow was placed into temporary protective custody. The youngest child, the only one still with her, was now removed. Investigators confirmed that Malaya was no longer cooperating with their expanded inquiries. She declined further interviews. She declined involvement in new searches. She was, for all intents and purposes, unreachable. Meanwhile, more troubling details emerged. Malaya was observed to have deleted photos of Daniel from her social media accounts. She did not attend any more community gatherings. She offered no updates to law enforcement or the public. And most notably, she never once physically participated in searching the wooded trails, rivers, or roadsides where her children were last believed to be. Volunteers combed miles of terrain. The terrain was punishing: thick undergrowth, steep drops, and swampland. Searchers suffered exhaustion, injury, even dehydration. But Malaya stayed home. Throughout all of this, the fundamental truth remains: 2 children vanished. There was no sign of forced entry, no clear witness, no distress calls. And yet, the mother, who should have been the loudest voice in the room, became an echo chamber of silence. Was she in shock? Was she hiding something? Was she being protected by a family more loyal to blood than to law? What makes this case even more complex is that no single action by Malaya is overtly criminal. She didn't flee the country. She wasn't charged. But it's the accumulation of her choices, the refusal to help, the lack of emotional display, the quiet relocation, the avoidance of interviews, the deletion of digital traces, that tells a different story. One that doesn't scream guilt, but quietly suggests foreknowledge, or fear, or both. To this day, neither Lilly nor Jack Sullivan has been found, and Malaya Brooks Murray remains an unindicted enigma at the center of their disappearance. Whether she knows more than she has said, or whether she too is caught in a web of silence passed down through generations of distrust, one thing is certain: in this case, silence is not peace, it's power, and it's withholding the truth. What did Malaya speak? One reason Malaya has remained under deep suspicion, much like Daniel, though her reactions and words were entirely different from his, is the web of contradictions in what she said about the children and the circumstances surrounding their disappearance. In the early hours of the case, Malaya Brooks Murray placed a 911 call reporting that her 2 children, 6-year-old Lilly and 4-year-old Jack, had vanished. She told the dispatcher, "I woke up and the house was too quiet. I think they opened the sliding back door and went outside." Later, in media interviews, she added, "They happened to just get out that sliding door. We can't hear it when it opens." This explanation, however, quickly raised red flags. While she insisted the door made no noise, and she had no way of knowing when it opened, there were no signs of forced entry, no physical evidence that the door had been used, and no audio disturbances reported by neighbors. For such a major event, there was startlingly little to support her version of events. Further complicating the story were Malaya's own conflicting statements. In one interview, she confidently said, "We always make sure we're out there with them," implying constant supervision when the kids went outdoors. That statement directly contradicted her claim that the children had wandered out on their own while she was asleep. It introduced a serious inconsistency. If the family always watched the kids outside, how and why did that safety protocol break down on the very morning the children disappeared? Safety behavior inside the home also didn't add up. Malaya admitted the sliding door didn't make noise, which suggests she already knew it could be opened quietly. Yet, she never installed child-proof locks or additional safety measures. There was no alarm, no latch, nothing to prevent a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old from slipping out unnoticed. No neighbors reported hearing children crying, calling, or even the door opening. And even more puzzling, no footprints or physical signs were found around the trailer to indicate 2 small kids had gone into the woods. The story gets shakier when you consider the children themselves. According to Daniel's family, Jack's stepfather, both children were nonverbal, with Jack having particularly limited mobility and comprehension. That raised serious doubts about the plausibility of the kids managing to open a door, navigate outside, and vanish without leaving a trace. Yet Malaya's text is publicly on social media. They are not scared of strangers. They are friendly. They could follow anyone. That painted a completely different picture of their behavior. That contradiction called into question whether she was misleading investigators and the public, or simply inconsistent in her understanding of her children's abilities. Another strange detail was the way she described the morning's events. Malaya said she was drifting in and out of sleep when the children apparently left. But then how could she have noticed the house was too quiet? That phrase implies she was alert enough to register silence, but not alert enough to hear the door slide open or her children moving. The blurry timeline only added to the confusion. She could not remember the last time she saw her children. She didn't know if they had slept in her room or their own. And crucially, she couldn't pinpoint when she first realized they were missing. The timing of the 911 call is another red flag. It was placed around 10 a.m., a relatively late hour for someone to be just waking up and noticing their children are gone. If the kids had been missing for hours by that point, why the delay in calling? That uncertainty widened the gap in the timeline and made investigators wonder if the disappearance may have occurred even earlier than reported. Adding more fuel to the skepticism was the school attendance record. The last confirmed sighting of the children was on April 29th. April 30th was a no-school day, and Malaya claimed she kept them home on May 1st and 2nd because Lily was sick. Yet there's no medical proof, no doctor's note, and no third-party confirmation that Lily was indeed unwell. On May 1st, she contacted Daniel's family to cancel a planned visit, again citing the alleged illness. Some now suspect that the children may have already been missing or worse by that time, and May 2nd may have been a delayed report. The environmental conditions that morning made the story even harder to believe. It was cold, wet, and heavily wooded, a tough area for even adults to walk through. Search teams, including K-9 units, drones, and professional rescuers, combed every inch of land surrounding the trailer without finding a shred of evidence. Not a single shoe, sock, trail, or footprint. If the children had truly walked off, how could they have simply vanished? Even the morning's soundscape made little sense. Malaya claimed she didn't hear anything. But for 2 young kids to wake up, move through the house, and leave without making a sound, no footsteps, no chatter, no cries, is nearly impossible. This absence of sound, coupled with no visual or physical traces, shattered the credibility of the wandering child theory. Finally, the core of Malaya's version rests on a single unstable statement: "I was drifting in and out of sleep." It places her in a half-aware state that conveniently evades accountability. She wasn't fully asleep, yet she noticed nothing. She wasn't fully awake, yet she was confident enough to narrate what supposedly happened. It's a position that's emotionally safe for her, but logically, it doesn't hold. In sum, from inconsistencies in her account of how the children left the house, to conflicting statements about their behavior, and a timeline riddled with vagueness and delays, Malaya's initial claims raise more questions than they answer. Her version of events is not just thin, it contradicts itself at every turn. For investigators and the public alike, these contradictions are not just frustrating, they are the very cracks through which the truth may eventually emerge. For language analysis, when a mother speaks about her missing children, people expect emotion. They expect urgency. They expect a storm of grief breaking through every word. But with Malaya Brooks Murray, what people got instead was a wall, flat, cold, immovable. And in that silence, investigators found something far more disturbing than panic: distance. From her first appearance in the media, Malaya exhibited a striking absence of emotional expression. In interviews aired nationally, she did not cry. Her voice didn't break. Her hands remained still. There were no trembling lips, no red eyes, no instinctive gestures like clenching her fists or covering her mouth. Observers described her demeanor as flat, emotionally blank, and detached. The kind of presence one might expect in a traffic violation case. Not from a mother whose 2 young children had just vanished without a trace. More telling than her face was her gaze. In several recorded clips, Malaya consistently avoided direct eye contact, especially when answering critical questions, such as when she last saw her children or how the back door could have been opened. She often looked down, shifted her eyes to the side, or blinked rapidly. In the realm of behavioral analysis, eye aversion during key moments is a major red flag. It often suggests discomfort, fabrication, or at minimum, an unwillingness to engage. Then there was her voice, low, slow, monotone. No tremor, no urgency, no inflection on emotionally loaded words like gone or missing. To some, it sounded almost like she was reading from a prepared script. Not out of fear, not even shock, but as if she had already practiced the lines. Her choice of words didn't help her case either. In every statement, Malaya spoke in passive, detached terms. When describing the moment she found the house quiet, she simply said, "I woke up and the house was too quiet. They must have opened the door." Not, "I panicked." Not, "I screamed their names." There were no signs of self-blame, no reflection on what she could have done differently. She never said, "I should have checked sooner," or, "I don't know how I missed them." Instead, she narrated like a bystander, not a parent. Even worse were the contradictions in her own statements. In the same interview, she said, "We always make sure we're out there with them." But moments later, "They happened to just get out the door while I was sleeping." The clash between these 2 sentences drew immediate attention from criminal profilers. You can't always be with your children and unknowingly let them slip out. This kind of linguistic contradiction is often seen in people who are trying to stitch together a story rather than just recalling what happened. Malaya also called for an Amber Alert to be issued, asking the public for help. But this only deepened the suspicion. Why? Because she did not physically join the search parties, never handed out flyers, never did another press appeal after the first few days. Her only public cry for help was on social media, and even that was minimal. "They are not scared of strangers. They are friendly. They could follow anyone." This sentence, part of an early post, raised eyebrows. Instead of emphasizing the children's vulnerability, she almost seemed to rationalize their disappearance. It felt emotionally distant. Some critics even said it sounded like an excuse, not a plea. Behind the screen, things weren't much better. Members of the public who tried to contact her, neighbors, friends, strangers offering support, reported being blocked or ignored. Several confirmed that their private messages of encouragement or requests to assist were left unanswered. In some cases, people were shocked to find themselves removed from her friend list. This created an even wider rift between her and a community desperate to help. Then came the detail that disturbed many, as we knew before that she changed her relationship status to single, just days after the disappearance. While Daniel Martel, the children's stepfather, was still publicly pleading for their return, Malaya had already begun erasing him from her digital life. No photos remained, no tags, no acknowledgement. For a grieving mother, this was hard for many to comprehend. Another moment that stood out came from her phrasing of the initial discovery. She said, "I woke up, it was quiet, then I realized they were gone." But there was no panic, no timestamp, no context. What time did she wake up? Was it 6 a.m., 9, 10? Why wasn't there a flurry of movement, checking rooms, knocking on neighbors' doors, calling out their names? Instead, she called 911 at around 10 a.m., leaving a wide, unexplained window of time. Some experts believe this delayed response is significant. In most missing child cases, parents call authorities within minutes. With Malaya, there's just silence, then a call. No one knows what happened in between. These observations, her detached body language, her rehearsed tone, her avoidance of action, don't prove guilt. But they build a portrait. Not of a distraught parent, but of someone deeply guarded. Someone who perhaps knows more than she's willing to say. Or someone who's been taught, generation after generation, not to trust the system, and now finds herself unable to break the silence, even when it matters most. In the end, it's not what Malaya said. It's how she said it, and what she didn't say at all, that continues to haunt this case. The absence of Malaya. For Malaya Brooks Murray, the mother of Lilly and Jack Sullivan, her actions in the days and weeks after their disappearance raised far more questions than answers. While hundreds of volunteers scoured forests and ditches, and the community came together in prayer and support, Malaya appeared to move in the opposite direction, pulling away, staying silent, and eventually walking away altogether. From the beginning, Malaya never showed up at any of the search scenes. There's no footage, no photos, and no testimony placing her at the side of search dogs, rescue crews, or even just walking the trails near her home. Despite the rugged terrain and emotional toll, volunteers and police showed up day after day. Malaya didn't. As the town held candlelight vigils and prayer circles, hoping to bring the children home, Malaya was nowhere to be seen. She didn't attend a single community gathering. She didn't offer public thanks to those who were supporting her family. While others mourned and prayed, she remained silent and absent. She didn't create or circulate flyers. She didn't post daily updates. She didn't flood her social media with images of her children. In fact, it was others, Daniel, family members, community members, who shared those posters and pictures. Malaya's profile went dark. No calls for help. No pleas for their return. On May 17th, just 15 days after her children were reported missing, she packed up and left. She took her youngest daughter Meadow and moved away from the area. Most parents stay rooted near the last place their child was seen, hoping, waiting, searching. Malaya left it behind. As mentioned, while she had once posted vaguely about an Amber Alert, she made no follow-up attempts. She didn't pressure law enforcement, didn't call a press conference, didn't speak again to news outlets. When the nearby forest fire sparked concern, Malaya said nothing. When RCMP issued updates, she didn't comment. Even as speculation swirled and leads dried up, she offered no support, no response, and no indication that she was still involved emotionally or practically. People reached out. Friends, neighbors, even strangers messaged her, offering help, sympathy, or simply asking how to support. Many said they never received a reply. Some were even blocked. It gave the impression of someone cutting ties, not someone clinging to hope. She didn't push to keep the story in the spotlight. As media interest faded, so did any sign of activity from her. No social campaigns, no renewed calls for help. No candlelight vigils organized. It was as if she had stepped away from the entire situation. Back to the early stage of the investigation, she never released a clear timeline of what happened before the disappearance. She didn't explain where the kids slept, what they were wearing, or what they were doing the night before. That lack of transparency made it harder for anyone else, police or public, to trace the children's steps. She never organized an independent search or took initiative to fundraise, hire experts, or keep the public engaged. Everything that happened, the flyers, the searches, the updates, came from others. Not from her. One of the most striking absences is recent images or video of the kids. There were no updated photos released by Malaya, no footage showing what they looked like shortly before disappearing. These are basic, vital tools in missing child cases, and she didn't provide them. But most haunting of all, there's been no sign of yearning. No words like, "I miss you." No messages to her children in case they could hear. No signs of maternal grief, like clutching a favorite toy, holding onto their clothes, or returning to the spot they were last seen. Some have defended her, suggesting RCMP may have advised silence. But that same rule didn't apply to Daniel, who remained publicly involved. If they were both given that guidance, why did only one follow it? Or even if any other offered for Malaya? Before Lilly and Jack Sullivan vanished, there were already red flags surrounding Malaya Brooks Murray's ability to care for her children. CPS had reportedly been monitoring her for potential neglect or unsafe conditions. After the disappearance, CPS acted swiftly, removing Meadow, her youngest daughter, from her custody and placing the child in temporary protective care. This wasn't a light decision. It indicated that the authorities had serious concerns about the safety and well-being of any child in Malaya's care. Though not officially confirmed, there were persistent rumors in the community about Malaya's past drug use. These allegations have never been publicly denied, and her erratic behavior in the wake of the disappearance only fueled speculation. In missing children cases, where every detail is scrutinized, this history, true or not, raises doubts about her state of mind and her capacity to make sound decisions as a parent. Tensions with Daniel's family further complicated matters. On May 1st, just one day before the 9/11 call, Malaya canceled a planned visit between the children and Daniel's relatives, claiming that Lilly was sick. In hindsight, that sudden change of plans raised suspicions. Some now see it as a possible attempt to isolate the children or control the narrative before events unfolded. Psychological instability has also been suggested. Observers, including criminal psychologists and viewers of her interviews, noted signs of emotional detachment, flat affect, and an absence of typical maternal distress. These symptoms, combined with a lack of public cooperation, point to possible mental health challenges, such as depression, postpartum issues, or emotional dysregulation. Malaya's household wasn't unknown to CPS. Community members reported long-standing concerns over the children's development and care, particularly Jack's. Some believed the children were under-supervised and lacked access to essential developmental support, like speech therapy or structured social interaction. These concerns take on new weight given the children's vulnerable state and the isolated nature of their home. Following the disappearance, CPS didn't only act against Malaya, they also barred Daniel from contacting Meadow. This blanket restriction suggests that CPS considered the entire household environment potentially unsafe or unreliable. It's a move typically reserved for situations involving suspected abuse, severe neglect, or conflicting stories under investigation. One of the most telling signs is the complete absence of any public effort by Malaya to regain custody of Meadow. There were no statements, no appeals, no reports of court hearings or legal filings on her behalf. In many similar cases, parents fight tooth and nail for their children. But Malaya remained silent, even as Meadow was taken away. Whether this reflects resignation, legal advice, or a belief that she wouldn't succeed, it's a silence that speaks volumes. Adding to the mystery, when Malaya left her Garrick home on May 17, she did so suddenly and without explanation. She took Meadow with her initially, but the child was removed soon after. Community members later confirmed that Meadow was no longer with her, matching the CPS intervention timeline. To this day, there's no evidence that mother and daughter have been reunited. Perhaps the most alarming detail came from a leaked police dispatch on May 2nd. Officers at the scene were instructed to ensure Malaya did not leave the house. This immediate containment suggests investigators had suspicions about her role, or at least feared that her actions could disrupt the integrity of the investigation. From the start, she was a person of concern.
Just make sure mom stays close to the house there in case they happen to sneak out and get back into the house.
Together, these elements paint a portrait of a woman already on thin ice, with child welfare services, before the unthinkable happened. In the aftermath, her silence, withdrawal, and history all converged into a single, chilling question. Was this just a tragedy, or something far more deliberate? The Absence of Brook Family. From the perspective of the local Mi'kmaq community, there are serious doubts about the official story surrounding Jack and Lilly Sullivan's disappearance. One respected elder, who has lived in Nova Scotia all his life, said there is no way a 6-year-old girl like Lilly would have let her 4-year-old brother wander off into the thick forest alone. It was early May, cold, damp, and still snowy in some areas like Cobequid. According to him, Lilly would have instinctively taken on a caretaker role, especially in a scary or unfamiliar situation. And if the kids had gone into the woods, someone would have heard them, especially Lilly. Her voice, her cries, would have echoed. But there was only silence. That's what doesn't make sense. Another major red flag for the community was the almost total absence of the Brooks family during the search. Malaya's father, Henry Brooks, is known locally as a skilled hunter and tracker. But he wasn't there. People in the area know the Brooks family, and they know that if the family truly believed those kids were lost in the woods, they would have been out there day and night. From the perspective of the local Mi'kmaq community, there are serious doubts about the official story surrounding Jack and Lilly Sullivan's disappearance. One respected elder, who has lived in Nova Scotia all his life, spoke up in a detailed post. He said there is no way a 6-year-old girl like Lilly would have let her 4-year-old brother Jack wander off into the thick forest alone. It was early May, cold, damp, and still snowy in some areas like Cobequid. To understand the deeper tension, you have to look at the Brooks family's background. They are a well-known Mi'kmaq family, connected to some of the oldest indigenous bloodlines in Nova Scotia. They're recognized for their artistic gifts, but also for their rebellious streak, especially toward law enforcement and government systems. The Brooks are often described as clannish and protective of family. Within their culture, loyalty to kin comes first. If a family member was involved, or even suspected, there's a strong chance others would stay silent or close ranks around them. Not out of guilt, but out of deep-rooted tradition. It's part of their way of surviving. That suspicion toward authority is also grounded in painful experience. Tanya Brooks, a member of the Brooks family, was murdered in 2009. Despite the community widely believing they knew who did it, no one was ever charged. Tanya's death, and the police's failure to bring justice, left a lasting scar. Some of her siblings went to jail, either while trying to seek justice themselves, or because of their own downward spirals. Trust in the police has never recovered. And then there's the historical trauma. The 60s Scoop, a government program that forcibly removed thousands of indigenous children from their homes between the 1960s and 1980s, is not just a part of history. It lives on in memory and fear. Today, a new version of that system exists, called the Millennium Scoop. Indigenous children are still taken from their homes at disproportionate rates. In many cases, there's little justification, just vague claims of neglect or instability. For Indigenous parents, especially young mothers, that threat feels very real. In fact, the elder recounted a recent case where a Mi'kmaq woman, around the same age as Malaya, had both of her daughters taken away by child services simply because their father killed himself. There was no abuse, no violence, just grief. And yet, the children were scooped. That kind of story isn't rare in their community, which is why some families do what might seem unthinkable to outsiders. They hide their children. Not because they're criminals, but because they're afraid. So, when someone asked if it's possible that Jack and Lilly were hidden by their own relatives to avoid government intervention, the elder's answer was blunt. Yes, we would. That wasn't said as a joke. It was said with deep conviction. To some in the community, hiding the children wouldn't be a crime, it would be a form of protection. A last resort to keep their family intact. To outsiders, the behavior of Malaya Brooks and her relatives might seem cold or suspicious. But to those who've lived through this history, it can also look like trauma playing out in real time. This disappearance didn't happen in isolation. It happened in a place where the government has taken children before. where trust in the system is low. Where silence might not mean guilt, it might mean fear. Fear of losing what little you have left. Theories. In the absence of solid evidence, and with so many questions left unanswered, the public has turned to theories, some grounded in observed behavior, others in community insight or personal suspicion. Among the most discussed are those that center around Malaya herself. It's important to clarify, these are not accusations. They are reflections of how people have tried to make sense of a deeply confusing and painful situation. Everything that follows is based on public observations, statements, and speculation, not confirmed fact. The most popular theory related to the inconsistency in what Malaya spoke and did since this case began is the theory of the accidental death and cover-up. Look back the statements. From the very beginning, there were things that didn't add up. Malehya claimed she woke up and noticed the house was too quiet. That, she said, was the first sign something was wrong. But what she didn't mention was hearing a door open, or any sudden noise, or even the sound of her children playing. It wasn't chaos that woke her, it was silence. That kind of silence doesn't come suddenly. It feels like something was already over by the time she woke up. There were also contradictions in what she said about supervision. In one breath, she claimed that they always make sure we're out there with them, but in the next, she said the kids just happened to get out while she was sleeping. Which one was it? If she was asleep and they were outside, who was watching them? This contradiction points to a deeper issue, that perhaps the children were left unattended, and something tragic happened while no one was watching. Adding to the suspicion is the ambiguity in the timeline. Malehya couldn't even clearly say when she woke up. Around 10 a.m., maybe. She wasn't sure. There was also a notable delay before calling 911. That kind of delay raises an unsettling possibility that something happened, and someone took time to react, clean up, or think through a story. In leaked messages, Malehya described her children as being not scared of strangers, and that they could follow anyone. Many found this disturbing, not just because it painted the kids as wanderers, but because it seemed like she was preparing an excuse in advance, a way to shift blame from herself. It came off as too convenient. But the moth damning detail may be what wasn't found. The RCMP reported no signs of forced entry. No struggle, no broken glass, no blood. The house was clean, almost too clean. All of that suggests this wasn't a kidnapping. It looked like a disappearance that was arranged after the fact. Then there was the fire. A blaze broke out in the woods behind their home not long after the children vanished. RCMP haven't linked the two officially, but the timing is chilling. Could it have been used to destroy evidence? A body? A piece of clothing? No one knows, but people are asking. Malehya's behavior afterward only deepened the suspicion. She didn't join search efforts. She didn't appear at vigils or prayer circles. She didn't even stay in town. Just 15 days after her kids vanished, she packed up and left with her youngest daughter Meadow. That's not what desperate mothers do. It's what someone might do when they already know there's no one left to find. Daniel's statements weren't free from contradiction either. At first, he said he woke up around 10 Ozard and found Malaya in a panic. But at another point, he claimed she didn't remember if she locked the door. That feels like narrative control, adjusting the story to fit the idea that the kids just wandered off. It's not consistent. Neighbors also chimed in. They said the area was so quiet, you could hear everything. If a child was crying or running into the woods, someone would have heard it. But no one did. No barking dogs. No distant cries. Just silence. Malaya claimed the back sliding door was open, implying the kids walked out. But no one saw them open it. And there's no evidence Jack, who was just 4 years old, could have managed it alone. It's a detail that leans heavily on assumption with no proof. One of the most glaring red flags, Malaya never searched. Not alone, not with others. In stories where kids truly go missing, parents often look until their legs give out. Rain, cold, darkness, none of it stops them. But not here. she stayed away. Then there's Meadow, her youngest. After the disappearance, CPS removed her from Malaya's custody. That action doesn't happen lightly. It implies serious concerns about the home environment. If something happened to Jack and Lily, Malaya had a strong reason to cover it up, to keep Meadow. A leaked audio dispatch from May 2nd revealed that police had already flagged Malaya. They even issued a directive not to let her leave the scene. That early suspicion tells us something. Investigators saw red flags from the start. Online sleuths began comparing the case to others where children died in tragic accidents, and the parents panicked. The patterns are eerily similar: a vague timeline, clean house, no physical evidence, and parents who detach emotionally. Sometimes it's not malice, it's fear. But fear still covers the truth. Another theory, fentanyl. It sounds extreme, but it's not impossible. Both Malaya and Daniel were almost unemployed, yet maintained a home and lifestyle. Some wonder if they were involved in drugs. Fentanyl is so lethal that a few grains can kill a child. If Jack or Lily got into it, even by accident, it could explain a sudden death. Calling 911 might mean arrest, so maybe someone panicked and tried to hide the evidence. That would also explain why no trace was ever found. Why search dogs came up empty. Why no biological evidence was discovered. A controlled, early-stage cover-up. Malaya left town. She stayed quiet, and CPS stepped in to remove her only remaining child. Each of these steps reinforces the theory. Maybe this wasn't an abduction. Maybe it was an accident. A moment of neglect. A tragedy made worse by fear, panic, and a choice to hide instead of tell the truth. On the other side of the debates, many people believed that Jack and Lily weren't lost or taken, but intentionally hidden by their own family to protect them from being removed by CPS. To understand this theory, you have to understand what the 60s scoop and Millennium scoop meant for Indigenous families in Canada. Starting in the 1960s and continuing well into the 1980s, thousands of Indigenous children were forcibly taken from their homes by child welfare authorities. They were placed in foster care or adopted into white families, stripped of their language, culture, and identity. And though the 60s scoop is now recognized as a dark chapter in Canadian history, its shadow hasn't disappeared. In fact, many believe it has simply evolved. Today, the so-called Millennium scoop continues that legacy. Indigenous children are still being taken from their families at alarmingly disproportionate rates, often under vague allegations of neglect or instability. The trauma never stopped. It just changed names. And within communities like Malaya's, the fear that CPS could remove a child at any moment is very real. In the weeks leading up to the disappearance, Malaya was reportedly under CPS monitoring. Her ability to care for her children had already raised concern. Then, after Jack and Lily vanished, her youngest daughter Meadow was removed from her custody. CPS doesn't make that kind of decision lightly. That removal strongly suggests authorities believed there were risks to Meadow's safety in the home, even before any official conclusion had been drawn about what happened to her siblings. This opens the door to a chilling but plausible question. What if Jack and Lily weren't missing, but were hidden? Hidden by family, possibly with the help of others in the Mi'kmaq community, as a last-ditch effort to prevent another scoop. Within this theory, the goal wouldn't be to deceive out of guilt, but out of desperation. This possibility is reinforced by the words of a respected elder from the Mi'kmaq community. He didn't speak in riddles. He said plainly, "Would Canadian First Nation reserve communities hide Jack and Lily from the government and RCMP with social services attempting a scoop?" The answer is simple. Yes, we would. That isn't a statement of guilt. It's a statement of defense. A cultural reaction born from decades of loss. Further strengthening this view is the deeply rooted tradition of internal protection within the Brooks family. Described as clannish and protective of family, the Brooks are known for guarding their own and keeping outsiders at bay. If one of their own was in danger of losing her children to the system, it's entirely plausible that the family would act in secrecy, believing they were doing the right thing. In this context, silence isn't a cover-up, it's loyalty. There's also the issue of trust, or lack thereof. Tanya Brooks, a relative of Malaya, was murdered in 2009. Despite widespread belief in the community that people know who was responsible, police never made an arrest. That failure, one of many in a broader pattern, has fueled a deep distrust in the justice system. So, when the Brooks family avoids cooperating with police, or refrains from joining public searches, it may not be a sign of guilt, but of disillusionment. To them, the system never protected Tanya. Why would it protect Jack and Lily? Another layer of complexity comes from CPS action toward Meadow. After the children went missing, Malaya moved away from Gerlach with Meadow and reportedly cut off contact with Daniel's side of the family. Within days, Meadow was removed from her care. The quick intervention and ongoing silence raised questions. Why didn't Malaya appeal? Why didn't she speak out, as most parents would when separated from their child? Was she afraid? Or did she believe back would trigger another attempt to remove all her children? According to members of the Mi'kmaq community, it wouldn't be the first time this happened. The elder mentioned a woman at Malaya's age or both her daughters scooped by CPS after the father died by suicide. That's all it took, one traumatic event, and the system stepped in. It's no surprise, then, that a mother, fearing the same outcome, might act radically, especially if she believed she had the support of a tight-knit community with a long history of resisting outside control. To outsiders, this theory may sound extreme, but within the First Nations of Canada, it aligns with decades of experience. These aren't conspiracy theories, they are memories. They are wounds. And in that context, the idea that Jack and Lily were hidden isn't crazy. It's survival. However, if this theory is true, if Jack and Lily were deliberately hidden to avoid a CPS intervention, then a hard question must be asked. Why wasn't it done more quietly? Think about it. The disappearance sparked national attention. Police flooded the area. Volunteers scoured every inch of the woods. Media circled the house like vultures. If the goal was to keep the children safe and out of the system, why risk the noise of a missing persons investigation? Why draw that kind of spotlight? The operation, if it was one, doesn't match the outcome. You don't start a quiet protective act by triggering helicopters, K9 units, and Amber Alerts. And the longer the case went on, the more questions were asked, not fewer. Police started digging deeper. CPS stepped in and removed Meadow. Investigators began looking harder at the adults in the house, especially Malaya. If the plan was to protect, it may have done the opposite. It brought more attention, more suspicion, more scrutiny. It also raises another uncomfortable truth. If the children were being hidden, why hasn't anyone cracked? No slip-ups, no sightings, no anonymous tips. Years may pass, but secrets this big tend to leak. And the longer they don't, the more people wonder, was it really protection? Or is that just another layer of misdirection? This is the tension at the heart of the CPS theory. It sounds plausible from a cultural trauma lens. But when you add logistics, psychology, and pressure from the public eye, it starts to shake. The last theory, one that's harder to prove but impossible to ignore, suggests that Jack and Lily weren't lost, kidnapped, or dead at all, but were intentionally handed over to someone else. At the heart of this theory lies one chilling question. Were Jack and Lily given away? Not abducted by strangers. Not lost in the woods. Not victims of a tragic accident. But deliberately handed over, with consent, planning, and intent. It's a theory many hesitate to speak aloud, but one that refuses to go away. And it doesn't take wild speculation to see where it comes from. It grows from gaps, from silence, and from actions that feel too intentional to ignore. One of the earliest reasons people began to question this possibility, one more time, was the financial situation of the parents. At the time of the children's disappearance, neither Malaya nor Daniel had stable employment. Still, they had a home. They had a car. They were supporting 3 children. Many have asked, where was the money coming from? Could there have been some kind of transaction? Some exchange made quietly behind closed doors. The physical scene offered little clarity, No broken windows. No signs of forced entry, no DNA, no clothing, no sound. It was as if Jack and Lily had simply vanished into thin air. But children don't just disappear without noise or trace, unless they left calmly, maybe even willingly, led by someone they knew, or at the very least, someone their parents trusted. Malehya's behavior after the disappearance only added fuel to the speculation. Just 15 days after her kids went missing, she packed up her youngest daughter, Meadow, and left town. She didn't attend search parties. She didn't show up at vigils or press conferences. She made no public statements asking for her kids back. That kind of withdrawal, so soon, felt more like someone retreating from exposure than someone in mourning. Even more curious, Malaya didn't appear to challenge CPS when Meadow was removed from her care. There was no public legal fight, no visible attempt to regain custody, no clear record of full cooperation with authorities. Some people believe that's because she already knew where Jack and Lily were, and that the missing children narrative was just a cover for something more controlled. The forums have pointed to other cases where parents, under pressure from financial hardship or fear of CPS, secretly handed over children to friends, family, or underground intermediaries. These cases often start the same way: a vague missing persons report, no physical evidence, and a parent who quickly goes silent. Could this be another one? That idea gains more weight when you add in what Daniel's mother saw the morning the children disappeared. She visited the house that day and noticed Malaya standing at the window, looking outside, not frantic, not in tears, but blank, expectant. She later described her expression as, like she was waiting for something. Not like a mother in crisis, like someone watching a plan unfold. That observation hit many like a punch. It didn't prove anything, but it felt telling. Combined with Malaya's silence, her early exit, her odd phrasing, and the spotless crime scene, it all paints a picture that doesn't look like chaos. It looks like choreography. And if this was a handoff, who received the children? Some online sleuths have questioned whether someone close to the family might have taken them. Someone who wasn't a stranger. Someone who wouldn't raise alarms. It's been theorized that Malaya and Daniel may have worked with or been pressured by a third party. Possibly even someone within their extended circle. Some believe that's why so many in the family have stayed quiet. Not because they're guilty of a crime, but because they're protecting a secret. One too complex, or dangerous, to bring into the light. This idea aligns with broader concerns about child trafficking or underground adoptions, topics often sensationalized, but not without real-world precedent. In some past cases, children were quietly given away under the radar, with the help of intermediaries, sometimes under the guise of keeping them safe, or giving them a better life. Was something similar playing out here? There's no evidence, not yet. No names, no location, no transaction trail. But as long as Jack and Lily remain missing, and as long as their mother remains silent, this theory, however uncomfortable, won't disappear. It lingers in the shadow of what we don't know, and what nobody seems willing to say. Because if the children were given away, it means they might still be alive. And that means someone somewhere knows exactly where they are. Another complicated question in this case is whether Daniel, Malehya's partner, and the stepfather of Jack and Lily, is protecting her or trying to protect himself. From the beginning, he never publicly criticized or distanced himself from her, even as suspicion around her behavior grew. His initial statement matched hers. He claimed to have woken up around 10:09 a.m. to find Malehya already panicking. This aligned with her version of events, in which the house was too quiet, and the children were suddenly gone. In another instance, he added that Malaya didn't remember if she locked the door, subtly reinforcing the narrative that the kids may have wandered off on their own. Despite increasing public pressure and growing doubt aimed at Malehya, Daniel never altered his story or publicly wavered in his support. There's also no record of him volunteering information to law enforcement that contradicted her version. or suggested further investigation into her actions. This pattern of silence, for many, has been read as quiet loyalty, if not complicity. However, there are small cracks that suggest internal conflict or quiet dissent. Daniel's statements, though aligned with Malehya's, did shift slightly over time, particularly when speaking about the locked door. He also stayed out of the public eye, never appearing at vigils or press events. Nor did he participate in the broader search efforts. Some speculate that his silence may mask discomfort or knowledge he's unwilling to share. More puzzling is his complete inaction regarding Meadow, Malehya's youngest. If he had doubts about Malehya's parenting or feared for Meadow's safety, he made no legal move to intervene. Ultimately, Daniel remains a quiet figure, possibly loyal, possibly afraid, or possibly caught in something larger than he can control. His role remains as ambiguous as it is crucial. In the case of Jack and Lilly Sullivan, much has been said about the timeline, the inconsistencies, the silence, the theories. But perhaps what we haven't said enough is this: we still don't know. And at the center of that uncertainty is a mother, Malaya, whose every word, gesture, and absence has been pulled apart, examined, and interpreted through every possible lens. Some see guilt. Some see grief. But what we don't see is the full truth. Not yet. What makes Malaya such a complicated figure in this story is that every action of hers can be read in two ways. Her silence, was it detachment or devastation? Her decision to leave town, was it escape or survival? Her vague answers, were they deception or trauma-induced confusion? When we don't have the full picture, we start filling in the blanks ourselves. And when a mother loses her children under unclear circumstances, public judgment is often quick and merciless. But this case reminds us of something deeper. Grief doesn't always look the way we expect it to. Not everyone screams. Not everyone cries on camera. Not everyone stays in town, joins search parties, or posts on social media. Sometimes, when you lose the very thing that gave your life meaning, you go quiet. You shut down. And maybe that's exactly what Malaya did. It's possible that one day, new evidence will emerge. That truth will have a shape, and names, and a timeline. But until that day, we must remember that suspicion is not proof. And even if her choices are hard to understand, Malaya is still a mother who has lost her children. That is a kind of suffering none of us should rush to define. The lesson here is not to excuse, but to pause. To sit with the discomfort of not knowing. To allow space for complexity. Before we label someone a villain or a liar, we should ask ourselves, what if we're wrong? What if behind all the contradictions is a woman unraveling in her own way? Until the truth is certain, let us hold off on judgment and hold space for the humanity of a grieving mother. And most of all, let us keep praying for Jack and Lilly. Wherever they are, may they be safe. May they be protected. May they find their way back home. And may this story, one day, end not just with answers, but with peace. Here is just our personal thought. Hope you get it. Many people have started to question whether continuing to chase this case, layering theory after theory, is doing more harm than good. They say the speculations are spiraling, that the truth is getting lost in noise. But for many others, this ongoing pursuit is not about feeding drama. It's about not letting the world forget Jack and Lilly. It's about refusing to accept silence as the final answer. Every theory, every late-night discussion, every shared post is driven by one goal: to keep these children in the light. Because when attention fades, so does urgency. So does hope. This isn't about pointing fingers for the sake of blame. It's about refusing to let two missing kids become another cold case. It's messy, it's imperfect. But in a world where so many are forgotten, this noise is also a form of love, of fighting for them, even in the dark. They lose their hope, but we don't.